I want to bring in MS Now White House correspondent Jake Traylor, who's been following this. Barbara McQuade is a former U.S. attorney from Michigan, a law professor at the University of Michigan, and an MS Now legal analyst. And with me in studio, MS Now's Kevin Frey, who covers Capitol Hill. Jake, to you first, can you put this new information in context with what we already knew about the files and the process to get them released?
Yeah, Laura, I mean, look, first and foremost, it is worth noting again that the initial deadline was December 19th. So any conversation we're having after December 19th about the ongoing now millions of extra files that we didn't know about are all against the backdrop of the fact that congressionally and legally, Trump's DOJ did not release all of the files. And now that we know how many are still potentially out there to be released, this was a minuscule fraction that was initially released on the December 19th deadline. I was just speaking with a White House official about this new millions of pages numbers that we're now hearing, and that White House official said that they aren't too concerned with how large of a number that is because this investigation has been going on for so long that this is how the process goes, that a lot of these actual documents may not actually even be related to Trump specifically. But I think when I press that official, the thing that there is a misconnect there with is that what Americans want and what there has been really bipartisan, a ton of Republicans wanting is transparency, not just in the actual documents themselves, but transparency in this entire process. And that is what is confusing, is that we didn't hear from Trump's DOJ that they've recently obtained millions of new documents. Instead, it was obtained from Reuters and the Times in a government document that they saw themselves. So the issue that it seems to be continuing to bubble up for this White House is that there is an issue with the transparency of this process, Laura.
Yeah, it's stunning that it's gone from 1 million to more than 5 million. Barbara, it was just last week that the DOJ said that they had been handed another 1 million documents. The number keeps going up and up, with the DOJ reportedly bringing in 400 lawyers to work on it. So how does this process unfold? How also is it? I just want to get your reaction to the fact that more and more documents appear to be just appearing. What do you make of that? How does that happen?
It's hard to say, Laura. I mean, it really strikes me that there is incredible incompetence going on here, and maybe also some failure of seriousness to take this deadline seriously as they appropriately should. This is a very unusual document production for the Justice Department. In criminal cases, document productions are expected. Typically, before an indictment is filed, prosecutors have gotten their ducks in a row so that required documents can be produced in a timely fashion. What strikes me as unusual here is this case was a criminal case. Jeffrey Epstein was indicted. Ghislaine Maxwell went to trial. And so all of these documents should have, and likely were, reviewed at one time and organized according to discovery, what was producible, what didn't need to be produced, redactions as to victims and survivors. The idea that they've suddenly stumbled upon 5 million more and they need to get to it is just shocking to me. The other thing, the part about not taking this seriously, this legislation was passed in mid-November. On December 19th, Todd Blanche said, we've been having 200 lawyers look at these things. Well, now, suddenly they're putting 400 lawyers in it. The time to decide you needed more people is not 2 weeks after the deadline has passed, but before the deadline has passed. And so to me, that strikes me as not just incompetence, but a failure to take seriously a very serious deadline.
And all of this is happening nearly 2 weeks, as you noted, Barbara, after the deadline to release everything. Do you think that the DOJ deserves the benefit of the doubt here, that they are actually trying to comply with the law and just simply can't?
It's difficult to know what's going on there. As we discussed, transparency, I think, is an important part of this. What I would like to see is Congress expressing a little more outrage. We've heard it from some members of Congress. Representative Mo Khanna, for example, has been very outspoken in the failure to take this deadline seriously. What I would like to see is an oversight hearing. We are due to get a log from the Justice Department after they complete their production. It's supposed to be 2 weeks after the production, which would be this Friday, explaining what they did and did not produce. I think once we get that log, it would be appropriate to call Pam Bondi and or Todd Blanche before Congress to answer some questions about this, not just about what they produced and didn't produce, but about this process, because they really do seem to be thumbing their nose at Congress in the face of legislation requiring this production by December 19th. The separation of powers means that congressional laws need to be taken seriously and obeyed. If there's been a failure to do that, I think the American people deserve to know why.
Kevin, Barbara is laying out the million-dollar question there, which is what exactly is Congress going to do to force the Justice Department to comply? And I want to play some sound for you from the ranking member of the Oversight Committee, Robert Garcia. Here's what he had to say about what they might do.
There's a lot that Congress is doing and more that we can do. There's going to likely be some type of legal action that's going to be put in place, either from both Congress and outside groups. You're seeing this contempt charge that's going to move forward, I believe, in the Congress. I think there will be Republican support on that. There's conversations about taking that even further. Additional new legislation could be on the table.
Is it realistic to think that Congress or that Republicans are going to get on board, as Congressman Garcia is suggesting?
Right. So let's start with what the options are on the table. There's the short-term option that Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie are both leaning into, which is this inherent contempt idea, which is essentially to charge, to fine AG Pam Bondi for every day she's not in compliance with that law. That requires just an act of the House of Representatives, as Khanna has said, so that maybe is within the realm of possibility if they're able to pull off enough Republicans, which is what Garcia was hinting at in that clip. The other longer-term options would be, for example, to pursue impeachment against Pam Bondi, which that seems like a bit of a far-fetch given the Republican makeup of both chambers of Congress, or a legal option, which Senator Chuck Schumer has pushed for, saying he's going to try to force a legal mechanism in the Senate when they all return next week to try to force the Senate to actually take up legal action against the DOJ. Any one lawmaker could object to the procedure that he's probably going to pursue to do that, so that also complicates that path forward. At the end of the day, to kind of peel off another piece of what you were just mentioning, is where Republicans are landing here, because this is one of those issues where we have obviously seen this is peeling off support from the president. How many more are willing to come out and buck the president on this? We saw near unanimous support for the bill to release the Epstein files after a month and a half of dithering because the leadership didn't want to bring this issue up because it would be pushing back against the president. But if this continues to organically spiral in this way, could we see some Republicans pull off? That's one of the dynamics to be watching when the House returns next week. You
have to wonder if more Republicans pulling off actually makes the White House more and more nervous. And to that point, Barbara, I want to ask you about this, which is what the White House is essentially saying, that the White House said, quote, no matter how many times this story is told and retold, the truth remains President Trump did nothing wrong. Legally speaking, is there anything that suggests otherwise?
Well, I think it depends on what we mean by wrong. Do we mean criminal or do we mean wrong? And I think that there is information yet to come out. There's been reporting in the Wall Street Journal as recently as last night about how Jeffrey Epstein was recruiting employees from Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort. Let's learn more about that. We have seen some photos of President Trump with Jeffrey Epstein. Are there more? Are there other facts that we want to know? And I think the American people and members of Congress have made it clear that they would like to know more about what has happened here. So I think, you know, the word wrong is a pretty broad word. And I think when it comes to expectations of the president and society's moral reprehension for pedophiles, I think the people are deserving of knowing exactly what happened. Also, this president is not known for having a consistent relationship with the truth. And so I think the American people are wise to demand that we see the evidence and not simply rely on the president to tell us what's there.
That statement from the White House was in response to Wall Street Journal's recent reporting, Jake, overnight. And in that article, they revealed some details we didn't know about how Trump and Epstein's relationship went south. It says back in 2003, Mar-a-Lago was sending spa employees to Epstein's house. Quote, that came to a halt after an 18-year-old beautician returned to the club from a house call to Epstein and reported to managers that he had pressured her for sex, former employees said. A manager sent Trump a fax relaying the employee's allegations and urged him to ban Epstein. Some of the former employees said that to the Wall Street Journal, and Trump said to kick him out. The White House responded by saying the Journal was, quote, writing up fallacies and innuendo in order to smear President Trump. it's a little confusing why they would think that smears the president if he ultimately said that that was the reason to kick Epstein out. So clear this up first, Jake. I mean, doesn't that anecdote, that new information, back up what the president has said before?
Yeah, Laura, honestly, that is a great question, because a lot of the reporting we saw in this journal, in the journal's piece, was essentially saying that what the president has alleged for a long time, that as soon as he knew of any wrongdoing of Epstein, that he was kicked out of the club. Some of that was confirmed in the piece. There were some sticky points, like, for example, the fact that there were very public, it seemed, rumors about Epstein's wrongdoing before there was any criminal allegations, and still Mar-a-Lago was sending employees regularly to his home. Also, the fact that when something was reported, there was no legal action taken whatsoever. But if we can just get inside the minds of the White House press shop here, what has been made very clear to me in conversations behind closed doors with White House officials is that any conversation about the Epstein files, for them, they view negatively. They view as a distraction from the things they want the American people to be focused on. And it really does show, that statement really illuminates the disconnect that the White House has with how interested the American people in Congress are with what is inside of these Epstein files. So that statement in itself is kind of caves in on itself, because there were pieces of this that actually would benefit the president's argument all along. But anytime they see any reporting about Epstein, they view it as a distraction.